thank the organizers of this meeting here today. I want to thank in particular our brother Sukant. I remember the last time I was invited to a meeting, I think it was a meeting on Libya, right? Yes. And on that meeting, we were pointing out to the people the devastation that was to come as a result of American, in particularly and Western-backed imperialist policies. And since we left that meeting, the fire is still burning over there, right? And it's getting hotter and hotter. The same people that they were over there supporting against the leadership and the Libyan government. A government that any African ought to be proud of. The highest living standards in Africa of all the people and that's there. Seeking to bring together African countries together. And we should know from we see somebody moving in that direction, we know why imperialism would want to move against him. And of course, he wasn't able to do that without those lackey and traitors that was there. But the point, however, is this, is that the fire that we left burning is getting hotter and hotter for imperialism. And as the imperialists went to Iran and said, come on, let's help us with some of these so-called terrorists. The leader of Iran was correct to say, but you're the one that created these people. So why are you asking us for help now? Okay? And so we know that it's injustice who started that fire, as we say within our campaign, and it's only justice that's going to put it out. And so we come here today on the subject that he's given us today. What's this subject today? Global resistance from Ferguson to North Korea. That's a beautiful subject, is it not? And he's given me 10 minutes to address it. I'm just so glad we've had some of the speakers we've had today because they dealt with most of what, not to say most of what I had to say, to be quite honest, because I go to so much meetings. And we're not lacking in analysis, you know. What we're lacking is actually putting that analysis into practice. That's what we're really lacking in. And I hope we got some containers. So I want to suggest we can do a little collection for our campaign later on. But let me deal with the issue of the global resistance. Global resistance. Ferguson to North Korea, right? Okay. Now the first time, like many of you, heard about Ferguson is when we heard a young black man, Michael Brown. There's so much of us that's being killed. I'm losing track. Michael Brown was killed. Young black man. And from what I understand from all the reports, and I have no reason to question it, apart from the report of the police that's been totally discredited, now they're not even talking about it anymore. The account was this black man had his hands up, right? And the famous word that went around the world, he had his hands up and he said, don't shoot. And I don't know whether or not they couldn't understand English or not, but they interpret that as to open fire and basically kill this young man. And as a result of that, quite rightly, the people of Ferguson rose up, and also the people around the states round up, and I was privileged to be called to a protest outside the American embassy in solidarity with our brothers and sisters over there. And as we talk about these attacks, hopefully at the end we will talk about some kind of summing up and how we respond, how we've been responding to some of these attacks, because I think we need to do some serious summing up. Many of you would have heard of, I've heard in this room here, heard of Michael Brown. Can I just see a show of hands, all those people in here has heard of Zelly Rodney? Right. You see, this is why we need these international connections. This is going to go right around the world. Right? This is the beauty of all these social media. Well, Zelly Rodney was a black man in this country. A lot of people look at Britain as a place where we just got unarmed policemen. And not only that they're unarmed, but they walk around with funny hats. And that's what they are. And it's the best bobby in the world. But the reality is that particularly in the black community, every 20 minutes or so, there's actually armed patrol going through our communities. And as I mentioned, the case of Zelly Rodney, a very important case. And we in the United Friends and Families, which I will say a little bit as well about later, we want to really make this a real international issue. Because a lot of what I'm hearing about what's going on internationally about police violence, I'm a little bit concerned. And I will touch on that concern a little bit later on. But Zelly Rodney was a black man, a young black man, that the police had him under surveillance for many months. And on the day in question, they done what they called a hard stop. And this hard stop involved, I'm glad to see my North Korean comrades here today, because they need to know what we're putting up with in this country. This is not just police killing. This is a violation of our fundamental right, and that's the right to life. This Britain is violating on a daily basis. They pulled up what they call an hard stop. A car come up from behind, a car come up in front, and then a car came up to the side, open fire. They didn't even give the man in the car. Everybody remember Michael Brown, right? They didn't even give the man in the car an opportunity to say, don't shoot. Within the twinkle of an eye, 6 bullets was pumped into this young black man. As a result of that, I got to fast forward, right? We haven't got a lot of time because we're talking about a few years. The police, the state response at the time was that we ain't going to do an inquiry. And for what reason? Well, they ain't going to do an inquiry because there's issues of national security here. National security, right? Using all of this kind of propaganda, so-called terrorism. I don't know how that fit into this. This young man had nothing whatsoever to do with any kind of militant resistance against the state here or abroad. And so through the campaign that the United Friends and Families give support to, through the consistent and the uncompromising struggle, yeah, I talked at the beginning about action, right? Because so much of us, we start talking about how great we are, how we're going to bring about revolution, how we want liberation. And then 6 months' time or 6 years' time, we don't see them. Well, this is a woman that didn't, a Zelly Rodney woman didn't call herself a revolutionary. But what she wanted was justice for her son. And when the British government decided that they were not going to give her an inquiry, she took them with some very good lawyers, right? Because we've got alliances in this struggle. And we gotta demonstrate this, because this ain't no just little marginalized struggle, which it is, but we've got to break her off. But there's a lot of people within society which is concerned about what is going on. And as a result of she taking them to the European Court of Human Rights, who condemned the British government for not allowing an inquiry into her son's killing, all of a sudden, the British government now started to think, well, maybe they was a little bit short-sighted. So now they decide to establish an inquiry. And that inquiry went on for quite a few weeks. And again, when I talk about the so-called our left and our so-called putting our analysis into action, for most of those 10 weeks or so we were down at the inquiry, I could count the amount of people, so-called progressive people, so-called revolutionaries, right? A lot of revolutionaries in this country, they say. On my one hand, they weren't even revolutionary, they was friends. I don't say friends of mine. I don't have so much. I'm only joking. Just friends of the family. And it was a disgrace because what was happening on their doorstep represented a serious indictment. But although the revolutionaries wasn't there, we had one of the pillars of the British establishment, a retired judge, who after looking at the evidence concluded that he could not see any justifiable reason why this young man was killed. And as a result of this decision, and he said it for good reason, because these police have these special guns that when that bullet hit you once, not only that you just know about it, it totally immobilizes you. So you can get shot once, but when you put 6 bullets into somebody like that, we can only come to the conclusion that his mother came to, that this was a state execution. And as a result of this decision, an outcome of that inquiry, all of a sudden the IPCC, the so-called quote-unquote independent police complaints commission, who's supposed to look at abuses of the police, despite the fact they had all of this evidence before, and despite the fact that the Crown Prosecution Service, who was supposed to prosecute criminals, all of a sudden now they then decided that, well, you know, maybe that there's a case to answer here. And as a result of that, that policeman, for the first time in British history, well, we got some lot of academic and researchers in here. We're going to probably come and try and question me later on, but never mind. Right? Was charged for murder. In my time, I've never known it. A British policeman charged for murder. And that case now is in the courts. And it's on this point what I say to people is that we don't want, you know, we've had a few cases already, and that's why you need to be in touch with the United Friends and Families campaign. Because when that case comes to court proper, we don't just want people inside of the court, we want people out, and we want our international supporters to be really highlighting this abuse which has taken place. So that's just a little introduction, right? How much long have I got?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. I got to talk about the United Friends and Families campaign. And yet, let me introduce myself properly. Minkah. It's a long time after halfway through I'm introducing myself, right? But never mind. It's just that when I think of these injustices, it sickens me so much. We just got to really bring about a change. And so, Minkah, involved primarily in the United Friends and Families campaign. I'm also in an organization called the Global African Congress, and also a local campaign that looks at London campaign against police and state violence. And that's a campaign that basically addresses the everyday abuses. Because whilst we, you know, a lot of us get disturbed, and quite rightly so, about deaths in custody, the everyday reality of policing on the ground, and particularly to our young men, it's absolutely disgusting. On a daily basis the violation takes place. And so coming back to the UFFC, which I primarily speaking on today, 1996, I was and continue to be a member of the Joy Gardner campaign. I'm not going to go into Joy Gardner fully, and I know my time is running, so I'm not even going to ask you what you know about her, but I'm just going to say to you very quickly again, I have more admiration for her than anybody that's so-called calling themselves revolutionaries. Because she was active then and she's still active now. And the brief facts around her case is that the police and immigration officers rushed into her home. She objected to it. At the same time, she was appealing against her deportation. The police, in trying to stop her screaming, put 13 feet of tape around her face, suffocated her in the presence of her son. killed her. We being a part of that campaign recognized that we could not just simply and could not see it just simply as just an isolated attack, as these attacks were continuing so much. So we decided to try and pull together all the various different families into what we call the United Friends and Families campaign. And our primary task is to give support to families and loved ones who have been killed by the state. And to be quite honest, the support we've had from most of the left group has been absolutely pathetic. Because it seems to me any group that they can't control, they don't particularly get too much involved with. And so that for us has been very, very disappointing. The United Friends and Families campaign have an annual procession. This year is going to be the 16th year we've had our annual procession from Trafalgar Square to Downing Street. And many of you would have seen some flyers on the table, and we hope you can give some support. And as I mentioned earlier on with a container, we are desperately in need of support financially as a campaign. Just one sister just rang me from Manchester today, says, would like to come in, but we're short of funds. Can we help? And even if some of you can't personally come, whatever financial contribution you can give to the campaign, it is greatly appreciated. I see a coffee mug on the floor, and I don't know if that can hold the contribution we're gonna get. But sadly, from my experience, the way in which we talk is not the way in which we act, so that probably will be enough. So we would like support on that front. And I was just saying in conclusion, we'd like you to come, and it's Wednesday. You've got it here, but just in case everybody trying to pretend that they didn't pick it up or something. They didn't see it. All right, it's Saturday the 25th of October, silent procession. It starts 12 noon Trafalgar Square to Downing Street. And let me say this now, we've got some very good comrades in this room, and I know you'll come along. And we'd love to see you. But we want you to do more than that. We want you to put it in your social network and to try and make sure other people come along. And if you don't come along and you put in your social network and 10, 15 people come along, we will say, thank you, comrade. All right? So please, 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 we need your support. In conclusion, Lord of mercy. Okay. Ferguson. We started with Ferguson, so we got ahead with Ferguson. And it seems to me that despite the fact that many people talked about Ferguson as being, you know, an exceptionally kind of response from the people, which is true, there's been many other smaller uprisings. One of them, I mean, the last one that was highlighted nationally, I suppose, was the Trayvon Martin case, which although directly it wasn't the police, but what we know that if it wasn't for the people rising up, the police wouldn't even have taken the action to charge, as far as I'm concerned, was a plainclothes police, right? Zimmerman. And so in looking at these uprisings over the years, you know, what we see is that uprisings come, and for a minute it takes over the media, then after that it goes down. And it seems to me that we've got to go a little bit further than that in terms of, you know, waging an ideological struggle in terms of what we mean about justice. Because we say no justice, no peace all the time, isn't it? People could be on the demonstration and heard that. Yeah, God, people don't even go on demonstration. And we've heard, what do we want? Justice. When do we want it now? We've heard it. And it seems to me, just like in the 60s when we didn't properly define what black power meant before our militant section was destroyed, we've got to wage a struggle to define what we mean about justice. Because some of the issues that's been coming out of Ferguson, for example, is that, well, the issue is that in Ferguson, we got 53 police officers. 50 of them is white and 3 of them black. So the issue is, maybe we should just get some more black police officers. No, no, no. That is not the issue. And we've got to be very serious to make sure we don't end up just finding ourselves chasing our tails. And we got to be aware of the Uncle Tom's. Yeah? He's still in the pocket of Uncle Sam. And we got to be mindful of that. Because they're coming to us to give us all kinds of excuses and justification for the police. And we in the United Friends and Families campaign is very clear. And we would like to engage with our brothers and sisters, not just nationally, but internationally, on this question of justice. That's not to say we can't learn something. But it seems to me for the families that's lost their loved ones, we should not accept, as these Uncle Toms and their hangers-on would say, for somebody like Barack Obama to send down his Attorney General down to look into the matter. It's very straightforward. A man has got killed, you charge him. What is there to really look into? Underlying this issue, that what we've got to really drum into ourselves as campaigners against police and deaths in custody. And by the way, I'm not just against police. I'm against injustice. All right? I want to be clear on that. Any anarchist in the room, sorry if I offend you. Right? But I believe that we must have a decent police force to deal with any kind of unruly and bad behavior in our community. So, our position is very clear that the police should not be above the law. And we know very clearly that if anybody had done what the police had done, they would be in front of a judge in no time. So we've got to push out a very clear, very simple demand that the police are not above the law, and when they commit these acts of killings, they should be charged. We think also, I'm coming to an end, right? Don't you worry, I hear you, I'm not disrespecting the chair. 1 minute. Right, 1 minute. We think that there's a serious issue of accountability. We need to struggle for a police force which is accountable to our community. And thirdly, well, I said what we talked about, but we've got to define what justice is. I made it very clear that if we're really seriously talking about justice, we've got to understand the police don't operate. And it's not just for you, because you're all like radical, right? But this is something we've got to bring to our campaigners. That we're saying that we're against the police murders, etc. But this is not, and we've got to just be clear on this. You know, this is not just no isolated police. It's backed up by the state, which represent a system of imperialism. And we ain't really ever gonna get justice until we get a system which is based upon the interest of the majority of the people and not the minority which currently exist. And so when we look at Ferguson, when it was not just Ferguson that rose up, but up to 60 cities, we shouldn't be just waiting for another uprising. We should be calling together all of those people in those 60 cities and internationally to look how we deal with what can only be determined as challenging this police state. Because that's what we're living under, a police state. Our international comrades must be there to endorse and give support to the fact that our human rights are being violated on a daily basis. There's one death a week in police custody in this country. We need to get that out there. We're going to end with a little slogan, right? And we're saying basically that we cannot be against imperialism at home and support it abroad. And so that's why we have to support our brothers and sisters fighting against imperialism. And I just end finally by saying a victory to one is a victory to all. Thank you very much.